Hello and welcome to New Filmmakers Los Angeles. My name is Danny De Lillo and we're here with Brian who's live in New York City. And he has created, if you've not seen it on before, Jes Fan in Flux. For those that have seen it, or for those that haven't seen it, let's take a look at the clip.
While I was in school in the RISD Glass program, learning how this matter transformed itself from one state to another really entranced me into thinking, like, how can I apply it to other kind of mediums? You have to move so quick because the material is alive.
Thank you for joining us today. I wish I could see you in person, but we'll manage. But thank you very much for your documentary and for those that haven't seen it, tell us a brief synopsis.
Great. Yeah. So Jes Fan in Flux is an artist profile of the glass sculptor Jes Fan. They sort of create these amazing biological-like amorphous sculptures out of glass, but filled with other elements that pertain to pressing issues of race, sex, sexuality, gender, and really interrogates all those things, using this unique process, but also originating from, their unique perspective and their personal experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I was like in love with the sculptures that they created. I was like, wow. I would love one. But it was such an incredible journey, and I was so enthralled with just the talent, but also just the story behind all the elements of why and how, and it was really fascinating. And sometimes I don't think you always get the depth of what an artist's meaning is behind their art in such a way. How did you come together? How did this story happen? How did it turn into a film?
Sure. So the film is commissioned actually by Art21, which is an arts organization, and they've been around for a couple decades, profiling artists from around the world. And so I'd worked with them on a previous film about a different artist by the name of Doreen Garner, and she also interrogates race and does some very confrontational work about race and gender with her work. And so on this next project, I collaborated with Jes Fan, and Jes is a friend of Doreen's, and they're both part of the art scene here in Brooklyn, and their work deals with very similar issues, right? Race and gender. And they're both using sculpture, but in very different ways, right? I mean, on one hand, Doreen's is very, as I said, like confrontational, and some might think of it as grotesque even. And Jes has a different take on it, and hers is, Jes' take is very different. And theirs is much more cerebral in some ways, and very much about the biological nature of these concepts that they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was sort of a natural fit to go from one artist at one end of the extreme and work with Jes at the other end of the extreme, but create a film that was specific to their voice.
Yeah, and what was kind of fascinating is that you get to discover as I say, the reasons behind why these sculptures are made, what they're made up of as well. I think as a documentary filmmaker, you never really know what you're going to go into, right? And
right.
It's a journey. You don't know how much footage you're going to have or how it's going to work in the edit and all those things. What kind of was there anything on that journey that you kind of was like, wow, you discovered this, or any challenges that you kind of had on that journey? Because it's not easy being a documentary filmmaker, but also when there's a lot you discover on that journey making it too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, especially working with another visual artist, they always have their own approach to their practices,
Mhm.
and Jess in particular, uh, you know, is working in a medium that I was completely unfamiliar with. And
Mhm.
you know, sculptures are one thing, but glass sculptures are completely a whole other realm. And you know, just watching that process unfold was really captivating for me. You know, I'd never been up close to it before, and watching them do it on the scale that they're doing it on, and all the implicit dangers and pitfalls working in that medium, seeing the glass break and
Yeah.
shatter, and also just the amount of the risk that they're putting themselves in, getting close to the furnace and extremely hot glass, like all of that was really eye-opening. And you know, a kind of like an interesting challenge, a very fun challenge as somebody behind the camera, you know,
Yeah.
trying to capture that process, and how beautiful and risky it is all at once. You know, as well as risking my own camera, getting close
Yeah. I was
to
thinking.
the furnace and like how hot it is. And I think that was a very interesting process, in that regard.
Mhm.
And just also thinks about art, kind of as a performance, right? And that they're performing each step of the process over and over and over, uh, and to the point where it, in a way, becomes second nature, and is very much like a choreographed dance for them.
Yeah.
And in a way, I felt a connection between what they were doing and what it's like to film documentary, you know, to film verite, to film in a guerrilla style, to follow a subject, um, in there, and to kind of find a rhythm
Yeah.
with between camera and subject. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, that was something that stuck out to me, especially as I was learning what they were doing, glass blowing and tailoring, you know, my movement behind the camera,
Yeah. I
and
mean, listen,
coordination. Yeah.
I mean, you took us, I mean, you did not hide, Brian, where you took us. I mean, you brought us right, I felt like I was right there in the furnace. Like, I mean, it was captivating, even from the very first shots, which you just got, which were just, I mean, I find glass work, I find it mesmerizing, and I'm always fascinated by the people that are behind it, because I think there's a sort of like any artist, an adrenaline rush for your art, you know, and for, you know, articulating your vision. And it was so powerful to kind of, you know, just be captivated in these worlds and these minds. But I mean, there must have been an element of risk, obviously, being that close and with your crew and everything else in your camera. Because I mean, you know, I'm sure you've probably not done a film, you've not done a documentary in that kind of environment before either, right?
No, yeah, that was definitely a first time.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think that there was a need to get very close, as you
Yeah.
said. You know, I think because of the way that Jess was working, the camera work had to mimic that those sensibilities, right?
Yeah.
Of really getting down to the kind of almost microscopic details, and that's essentially what Jess's work is about, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's about melanin and estrogen and hormones and these biological substances that you can't even perceive really, with your eye,
Hmm.
but interrogating those things. And so I felt like it was necessary for the camera to also do that, to be one as in love with the glass as a material as Jess is, but secondly, to also look at everything from a very myopic and close-up lens.
Yeah.
So it was certainly a fun challenge, and kind of the the first time I was trying to do something like that, for
I mean,
sure.
you know, I think, I mean, it's so interesting because there's so many, you know, elements of your subjects that was so interesting. But you know, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of people, even the feedback at New Filmmakers with the film festival, like, I'd never thought about hormones in that way before, you know, and it was a real sort of like amazing eye opener. And also just an understanding of just kind of understanding what even hormones actually are, you know, and then, you know, coming from, you know, a person, a visual artist that's maybe had to think about that more than the average person was also, you know, very powerful as well. Was that kind of a wonderful discovery for you as a filmmaker to kind of be unleashed in this kind of new world from that perspective?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why our collaboration works so well. You know, my background before filmmaking was actually around you know, social justice advocacy and
Mm-hmm.
specific to issues of racial justice. And so, you know, I've always understood race as a social construct and gender as a social construct, um, but to come to terms with it from the angle that Jes is looking at it, which is the biological basis for those things,
Yeah.
and calling out just how abstract those things really are, even though they're used to
Mm-hmm.
determine, you know, how a person might identify or how they're told to identify.
Yeah.
Having that angle and that perspective, then like just, you know, kind of opened up the way that I'd always been thinking about those issues
Yeah.
in a new light. You know, I think they sort of confirmed how I perceive those things, but did so from a new perspective, and in a way like in a way that is perhaps more powerful and more persuasive
Mm-hmm.
than how I thought about them before.
No, most definitely. I mean, it was very special because obviously it was you know, a celebration of our new filmmakers Pride Month, and you know, being part of the community, it was so great to see some very powerful stories, you know, in this particular program. But you know, I'm just curious as a filmmaker for you, and you mentioned about you know, previously, obviously, you know, making and creating and being more, you know, being more involved with you know, social injustice and everything else. What motivates you as a filmmaker? What is kind of your motivations, the documentarian? Like, what things motivate you in your work?
Yeah, you know, like a lot of documentary filmmakers, you know, I do come with an agenda, and I'm interested in uplifting stories from the margins of society,
Yeah.
from the people and places that you know, are often easily overlooked or obscured or in some cases erased, and trying to shine a light um, on those communities, but doing so in a way that is empowering
Mm.
for those communities, particularly, you know, the ones I identify with the most. And but at the same time, I recognize that, you know, as you know, making films is still making art and making entertainment in some way, and so that's sort of the thing that I've constantly been challenging myself to combine in these works, right? Is, you know, how can we make how can we present these issues in a way that is interesting and exciting,
Yeah.
that people want to watch, and isn't just you know, isn't just about human suffering, but rather about human resiliency and strength. Um,
Okay.
you know, things that are hopeful, things that make you think and really reflect. Yeah, so
Love it.
that was a lot of stuff, but
No, no,
that's
it's
how
all
I
good
think.
stuff.
Yeah.
And no, it's fantastic, and I'm just glad that you're a filmmaker because you know, you have a vision to articulate this in the moving image, and that's it's very exciting to hear all of this. And you know, I'm excited if you just keep making more. Speaking of which, what is next for you?
So I'm actually wrapping another short documentary right now, which is specifically about deportations in the Southeast Asian refugee community.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a rise of deportations for them, even though, you know, their community has been here, you know, since the 70s and 80s. They
Yeah.
came as refugees. They have complete legal status, but now are being separated from their families.
Wow.
So hopefully that'll be available for people to see in the next few months.
Oh, amazing. Oh my goodness. I love how you just get stuck into subjects that the world and we need to hear about. And you know, I love that so much. You know, there's, you know, it's, you have to have a certain, you know, patience being a documentary filmmaker, and you really, really do. For anybody out there that would maybe want to follow in the footsteps, particularly if they're maybe want to go in a documentary filmmaker, or any advice that you have in your experience thus far, do you have anything you could share with our audience?
Uh, I think it's, you know, it's really about figuring out the things that that you care about the most. You know, perhaps it's a little bit cliche to say, but I think there is a lot of truth in following what you're particularly interested in. And because I do feel like there's a tendency for a lot of filmmakers to just emulate whatever else is out there, rather than presenting your slice of the world to
Yeah.
everybody else. And you know, very likely that slice, that voice, is one that has yet to be heard, and that's actually what makes it interesting,
Hmm.
uh, and insightful, and I think is a way for people, especially for young filmmakers, to develop their own voice and create art that works, right? Rather than just copying other people, like really spend time on what it is, on your particular perspective that you bring,
Yeah.
and then I think it actually becomes much easier to tell that story, right? Because you're so close to it.
Most definitely, and I think, and I love that also you just, you know, you discover something, obviously, you know, like this film, and you know, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna put this into a film, and it may be something that you've not actually, you don't know much about yourself, but you still want to go out there and do it. And then with the next film you're doing, I mean, you're actually putting a profile on something that we should be knowing more about in other places, so we can raise awareness and we can make those changes. So I'm just glad, Brian, you're doing all that you're doing. It's very good, and I'm glad you're putting spotlight on communities that, as you say, have been marginalized and need to be heard. So really, really appreciate you, and just please don't stop making documentaries. That's the only thing.
Thanks. I appreciate the encouragement.
Pressure is on. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.